Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Marty Smith. Marty, your new book, Sideline CEO, it goes on sale Tuesday, September 26th. People can get their hands on it. It's great. You talk to so many people for this book, which I want to get into, but I got to hand it to you. This was a COVID project that you started, and by my count, you are the only person who finished a COVID project. So kudos to you. That's a win in itself.
Yeah, I think all of us put on the COVID-19 when we were sitting around the house for a couple months, not terribly motivated, but it really did kind of was spawned by COVID, because I sort of looked at it like, all right, I've had this idea since 2018. That's kind of when the title hit me, and it's a badass baller title. I mean, Sideline CEO is just it's a cool title. And I started to sort of conceptualize what it was, and then it went on the back burner because of all the responsibilities I have at ESPN. And then once the world shut down during COVID, Lainey and I, my wife and I, were very intentional, Connor, during that time, because it was the first time in my adult life I'd ever been home for an extended period of time. You know, man, you're a sports journalist. We live on the grind. We are on the run all the time. And I had to be still for a minute. And so we were super intentional about our time with one another and our time as parents with our children during that COVID lull and the quarantine time. But I'm a pretty restless soul, brother. I got to the point a couple months in where I was like, what if sports don't come back? What if we're in a position where I have to figure out how I'm going to get food in these bellies? So let me control what I can control. And I really started to dive back in at that time. I decided, okay, I can control doing the work on this written piece. And if I'm at home a little restless, I bet a lot of these coaching relationships I've been blessed to build through ESPN are likewise at home and dying to talk ball. So I called Mac Brown, brother, and 53 minutes later, I'd gone to a master class, and I'm like, all right, well, maybe this thing has a little bit of potential. A couple days after that, I called Urban Meyer, and at that point, I kind of knew, all right, this has juice. And so I set forth the process of transcribing those interviews and figuring out how to put it all together, and I still didn't have the format. How do I do this? Is each coach a chapter? How do I do it? And another thing during COVID that I tried to be intentional about was staying the hell out of my phone. I wasn't successful as I would have liked to have been.
Nobody was.
But I wanted to challenge myself mentally and emotionally. And so I tried to read a book every 10 or so days. And one of the books I bought during COVID was called I Want My MTV. And it was an oral history of MTV. And brother, it was like 11:15 at night. I open up this book, I start reading, and it was formatted in such a way that, let's say, it was MTV VJ, 3 sentences, artist, a paragraph, Viacom executive, a sentence. And I shot up out of bed and went, holy smokes, this is it. And my wife was like, where are you going? I'm like, I'm going to work. I figured it out. I got it. And so that's when I really started to put it together in this sort of oral history format, for lack of a better explanation, but unique project and one I'm so grateful I got to do.
Yeah, the oral history style of it makes it such a readable book in a lot of ways, because I think that's the best format to maximize this. Because if you would just talk to 7 or 8 people, maybe you do a chapter on each, and then you have them tell a story about like a specific time in their life when they had to turn to these leadership principles. But instead, the way that you're able to kind of weave this in and out, it's really, really good. And it allows you to get everybody's perspective kind of in and playing off of each other, almost as if they're sitting at some sort of leadership conference or something, where you have Saban and Kirby, Dabo, Cal, Kim Mulkey, like all these people. It's A-listers galore. It really allows you to kind of get their unique perspectives, and you formatting that way allowed them to have their voices heard. Who gave you the answers that you didn't expect? Because it's a subject that so many people have so many different opinions on.
I would say the vast majority of them at one point or another said something that sort of stopped time. But when you ask that, and if we're going for specificity on one or two individuals, when Doc Rivers took the moment to share with me what it was like to lead through the crisis when Donald Sterling, the former owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, said some terribly racist things, and Doc was the general manager and head coach of the Clippers in that exact moment. And he was very vulnerable with me and very open and direct about what it was like to walk into practice and how meticulous he had to be in every single nuanced decision he had to make as someone that in his mind, his players looked at as an extension of that ownership in that moment. And I won't give it all away. Connor, I think you've read it, but for Doc to say that he could tell really quickly how hurt his players were and that he had this list of notes that he was going to go through ahead of practice that day, but he just put the notes down. And he looked at his players and he said, hello, my name is Glenn Rivers, not Doc Rivers. I'm from Chicago. My mom had this occupation. My father had that occupation. And quoting him, I'm a black man, and I've seen more racism than any of y'all have. And him sharing how that disarmed his guys and humanized him to them, and what it was like then once he got humanized to them, and to then manage the aftermath in the media and in the public eye was just, I shared with him in the aftermath, Connor, that I was so grateful to him for doing that and for sharing that in these pages, because I feel like that specific passage will have tremendous impact on people. It certainly did for me. And Doc's a dynamic leader, and I am so grateful for him that he shared that.
It's called Sideline CEO, but having basketball perspectives in there, like you talk about with Doc, I think it definitely adds to just the theme of the book. And my favorite part, the part that really stood out to me, that kind of stopped me in my tracks, was actually what Izzo said, where he said, I tell you what I hate. I hate when people say he leads by example. I hate when I have a parent that always says to me, hey, my son's a leader. And I said, what do you mean he's a leader? He says he's a 3.8 GPA student. He works out every day. He does this, he does that. He's a hell of a leader. And I said, your son is not a leader. He's in the gym by himself. He studies by himself. A leader must influence people.
Izzo, he ain't leading nobody.
That hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, I've had people say about me before, like teachers that have said like, oh, Connor's leader. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I stay to myself. I'm a beta. I don't take on these characteristics. I'm too intimidated for those things. What did you think of when he told you that?
The same thing, because we've heard it. It's almost a cliche at this point. He leads by example. And there are certainly leaders who have done that. There are players who might be quiet by nature. There are executives who might be quiet or measured by nature, and people look at and go, that guy or that lady, they got it. They got it, whatever it is. So when Coach shared that with me, I kind of went, okay, wow. But it lends itself to what nearly every one of them said when I asked them simply, what is leadership? And it is getting people to follow you based on trust of your words and trust of your actions, especially when they don't believe they're capable of doing it themselves. And man, it's leadership's an interesting thing, because there are all of these different variables that are involved in the great ones. And you can be a great one with a completely different personality. Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney probably in their day-to-day walk couldn't be more different other than their football coaches. But they both have had historic success in getting there. If you read what they are saying in the pages, so much of it is similar. For example, Coach Saban saying, the goals pyramid in the Bama football facility doesn't say win an SEC championship. It doesn't say win a national championship. It says be a champion. All right? Do what you're supposed to do every single day to be a champion, and then maybe you'll have the opportunity to win a championship. Same thing with Dabo. Best is the standard is the way that he delivers that message. If you focus every day on finding your absolute best, maybe you'll have the opportunity to be the best. But if you're worried about being the best, you're not focused on what it takes to get there. It's really an inside-out approach. And for like leadership, a lot of our peers roll their eyes at that kind of stuff. I love that kind of stuff because I want to live my daily life that way. It's so hard to be where your feet are, dude. And I want to be. You and I live in a business where we compare ourselves to everybody all the time, where we get insecure about other people's opportunities, where it's all these different things. Comparison is a thief of joy. But if we live inside out where, okay, I am absolutely exhausting myself to find the best version, we don't have to compare. And it's just a unique thing, man. I love that stuff.
I think there are a lot of college football programs right now who are re-examining how they view leadership. And with Deion exploding the way that he has, I think that there is an opening in terms of what leadership looks like, in terms of like an open-mindedness that I hope will come of this. I don't want to call it a full-on renaissance. That seems a little bit grand, but I think the vast majority of Power 5 head coaches right now, they're either up and coming coordinators or they are former Group of 5 head coaches, right? And athletic directors view it through that lens. Okay, there are so few exceptions right now. And really so much of it is not based on whether or not you can call plays, especially as more and more head coaches are getting away from play calling duties. They just don't have time for it. But I think the as you talk about, the thing that a lot of media members, myself included, sometimes will roll our eyes at, leader of young men, that's never been more important. And I think that there are hopefully going to be a lot more views in terms of what that actually looks like.
You are so right that it's never been more important, and you're so right about the evolution of what that is. The reason that Sideline CEO was the title is I'm sitting there like these individuals, if you are a head coach, forget Power 5. If you're a college football coach, certainly an NFL football coach, you are a CEO because you have to take such a macro view of your program or your franchise in order to do all of the things that are necessary as the tip of the spear to make sure that it's successful. I think about Zach Taylor, and the reason I think about Zach Taylor with the Cincinnati Bengals is because I was just talking to Zach Arnett, the head coach of Mississippi State, about Zach Taylor. And they did a seminar with Coach Taylor about what it's like to walk into a culture that has, for the vast majority of its history, been, I think it's fair to say, disappointing, and flip it into what is now considered one of the great cultures in the NFL. And how do you do that? And what does that take? And what does it entail? It entails a great CEO who is completely confident and self-confident in his or her own methodology and an approach to that leadership. You named Deion. Deion Sanders is one of one. There might be other people who could flip a program around and they might have great philosophical approach. But Coach Sanders, look, the dynamic way that he cares first about the young people playing the game is striking, and it's amazing. And what does that do, Connor? We want two things as human beings so deeply. We yearn for hope and we yearn for belonging. And what is he producing at Colorado right now? Hope and belonging. Not just as a football family, as it were, but the whole damn country's watching. And you telling me, all right, I'm 5-star Johnny over here, and I was thinking I'm going to go play for Kirby or Saban or Dabo or Mike Norvell or whomever. I might be just taking a peek out west now because it sure does look fun and fulfilling. So, yeah, I mean, Dion, I admire that cat in a lot of ways. He's doing some great things.
I think it's interesting too with people that haven't necessarily had to lead an entire offense or an entire defense. And Shane Beamer is one that comes to mind. I've talked to him about that very concept about he kind of has that chip on his shoulder because when he's asked about not being an OC or a DC, he's like, well, as a special teams coordinator, I've had to do this, this, and this. I know how to lead people. And I know that your relationship with him is special. You call him governor. How wild is that when you were a young kid going to Virginia Tech games, you'd be where you are. And he was the guy holding the cord for his dad.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to sort of process because, and hold on, I'll get there in just a minute real quick. He not only has a chip on his shoulder about that coordinator thing, but he also has a chip on his shoulder about being absolute icon's son. And that everything was handed to him as a result of being an icon's son. Now, back to growing up. The vast majority of people where Shane and I grew up in the southwestern kind of part of Virginia, I grew up about 30 miles west of Virginia Tech. Of course, he grew up in Blacksburg. A lot of guys, especially where I grew up, you graduate, you figure out what you're going to do with your life professionally, you marry your high school sweetheart, and you stay. And that's an amazing thing. Like I'm a little envious of it in some ways because I see, like, my high school played its crosstown rival Friday night. 5,000 people showed up. We're a Friday Night Lights town, man. That's cool as hell to me. And, you know, was I grateful that I got the opportunity to be in Starkville, Mississippi covering a football game? Yes. But I'm paying attention to the rivalry too. But my point is, bro, not a lot of people spread their wings and fly out of there. Okay? So for Shane, who is a brilliant mind, who has learned under some of the greatest to ever do it, including his dad, to get hired down in Columbia and be the head coach and be doing such a great job, I just sort of, it's interesting because we are buddies. I mean, we played high school sports against each other. We've known each other since the 8th grade. And so it is odd that has unfolded that way. And I'll tell you, he's been a champion for me, whether he was at Georgia or he was at Oklahoma before he got to head coaching to the head coaching level, always was such a champion for me being at ESPN and everything I've had the great opportunity to do there. And he's just a stud, man. He's a great dude.
I love that you've never had to change who you are. You've never had to hide where you're from, which I know is something that you've probably talked about a lot. But I think there are a lot of people who don't fully grasp that there is a large part of the population where if you go to journalism school and you're going to be on air, the thinking is you want to sound a certain way. You want to sound like Absolutely. You're from Indianapolis or something. Like, get rid of your accent. We don't want to alienate anyone the second you open your mouth. Did you ever have someone at ESPN or any point in your career say, Marty, we need you to just try and do what you can to get rid of that Southern accent?
Not once. Not one time. And I'll tell you, though, so what happens, Connor, is when I go to Texas A&M or Georgia or Tennessee for our work for college football or college basketball, invariably, broadcast journalism students will approach me and say, hey, Professor X or Professor Y is telling me I got to go to school to lose this accent. And I tell them, no, look at him. Why didn't he have to do that? And I tell them, I just think that that's just not true. You can be Southern and articulate at the same time. And it's also funny to me how many people on social media say my accent's fake. As if it's this great benefit to have a Southern accent in broadcast journalism. But I will tell you one funny story about the accent. One reason I believe that I've never had to worry about that is ESPN hired me for NASCAR. And this accent is authentic to the NASCAR core fan base. And so look, I'm not over here using terrible grammar or double negatives all the time or anything like that. So there's the folksy part to it, I think. But I remember very, very distinctly doing a live report on the pre-race show from Bristol Motor Speedway in probably 2008, I want to say. And I got done with the live shot, and I went back to the media room, and I had a voicemail pop up on my phone. And it was Wendy Nix. And Wendy Nix, who is, of course, a phenomenal host across many different platforms. Wendy is from the PD region of South Carolina. And it was suggested to her to go to school to lose her accent. And she said to me, she saw that live shot, and she said, never, ever lose it. Don't let them change you. And I just thought that was, first of all, really cool and thoughtful of her to share that. But second, I'm like, I would have never had any clue that she was from that region because she's lost it. She's lost that accent.
It's kind of crazy how
I'm proud of it, dude. Like, I say this often. No matter where my branches may extend, I am forever rooted in Appalachia and Giles County, Virginia. And I am so proud to represent that area. And I always will be. And Shane is too. And I do wonder how he got out of there without the same accent.
I was going to ask you about that. Isn't that interesting?
Dude, I will tell you, even though it's only about 30 miles west of where it's another world. Blacksburg was the big city for us, and Roanoke may as well have been Manhattan, which is 60 miles away.
It's true. And James spent time at other places as well. So like there's a little bit of that. He talks about his roots in Kentucky, and there are stuff there as well. So maybe he's a little bit more of like I don't want to say a nomad, but he's got, he's got more than Virginia probably running through his blood rather. I want to talk to you about a clip that is just so all time. I watch it several times a year. You already know where I'm going with this. Leave the Sides is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It is so good. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, you've probably seen it on social media somewhere. But Marty's hosting SEC Nation. Marcus Spears, Tebow, Feinbaum, they're on set. And Spears was asking about the haircuts that you and Tebow get. And by the way, I'm like kind of a hybrid of you and Tebow. With the
looks good, man.
We're doing what we can. And so Tebow says, Paul, what do you tell them? You guys just all lose it. And Marcus's laugh is so great. It's such a great part. Paul doesn't lose it, but you, Marcus, and
I couldn't
Tebow,
breathe, dude.
It's so good. So tell me
that
the
is
story
the clip. That is the clip that they'll be playing at my funeral. Like that clip will live forever. It shows up in my social media at multiple times a week, every week. And it is funny every single time. And kind of the way it went down, well, you know the SEC as well as I do, or better. Do you remember a quarterback? It wasn't Gardner Minshew. Who was it? There was a quarterback who wore a Bieber T-shirt underneath his pads. I think he played for Mississippi State.
Yeah, Nick Fitzgerald did that.
Okay, there you go. So Fitzgerald wears the Bieber tee, okay? So we take a live, kind of the last 30 minutes or 40 minutes of SEC Nation each week. We just start hopping around the conference for the noon kickoff games, showing warm-ups, talking about that game as we show the live pictures of warm-ups. And we go to Starkville. We were in Auburn at the time, and we go to Starkville, and they show homeboy with his Bieber tee on. And that made me go, Tebow, you ever had a Bieber cut? I know you had to have had a Bieber cut. And he's like, well, you have one right now. So we start going back and forth and busting each other's chops. And it just gets fun. That's when Spears asked the question, what do y'all ask for? Like this direction or that direction? And then out of nowhere, I said something like a little off the sides or something. And when Spears said leave the sides, I'm telling you, dude, we went to break. Like none of us could breathe. It was the funniest moment. I've done some really wild and stupid things on television, as you may know. That's the funniest moment I've ever had on TV, and probably always will be. We couldn't breathe. None of us could breathe. And watching Tim and Marcus have that moment together, where they're just belly laughing and laughing all over each other. It's just gorgeous. I mean, it's great television.
It's almost better that Feinbaum it didn't have it wasn't like Feinbaum broke down too. He was actually able to answer the question and give a somewhat realistic answer, but it's so good. It's so good that Tebow put it as his sign off when he wrote the foreword for Sideline
Wasn't
CEO.
that hysterical?
Leave the sides. When I read that very first part, I'm like, all right, I got to pull out my phone. I got to watch the clip right
There's
now.
a guy. I don't remember the name of the hat company, or I'd shout it out, but there's a hat company, custom hat company in South Carolina somewhere, and they just made a run of hats with a leather patch on the face of the cap, and it's Feinbaum's head, and it just says "Leave the sides." And they actually wrote to me and said, the response to this hat is so overwhelming, we're actually going to sell the thing. Leave the sides, baby.
That'll be the clip that'll be on your gravestone, and then that's the clip that'll be shown when everybody's got like 4K video on their gravestones. Yeah, that'll be perfect.
Right, exactly. When we all have big screens on our headstones.
Yeah, of course. So that's the funniest moment on air that you've had. What's the most awkward moment you've had on air?
The most awkward moment I've had on air. I've had a bunch, man. I would say the one that was probably the most awkward was, I don't remember the year, maybe 2012, 2011, something like that. The NASCAR driver, Kurt Busch, with whom I'm now super close, he was pretty fired up about something. I asked him a question he didn't like. We kind of got into it a little bit, and a report was written about that kind of back and forth. And as a result, I would never have addressed it, but I had to address it on television. And I'm not sure, but I think if you type my name into Google or into YouTube, that still might be the first clip that comes up. But it was just ridiculous. I mean, it was just Kurt and I both being competitive people. We laugh about it now. But when you have to go on TV and discuss your own shortcomings like that, it's a bit of an awkward thing. And honestly, if I'm being honest with you, man, I wasn't self-confident enough in that season of my life to have great conviction about what I was saying. I hope that never happens again, but I would probably take a very different approach now. I would just call the person and be like, dude, I was an idiot. I'm sorry. But anyway, I would say that's probably it. I'm trying to think of some other awkward ones. There's been plenty of them, man, but that's the first one that comes to mind.
Of all the things that you have going for you in your life, great family, great job. You get to go to a new SEC town every single week, ESPN reporting year round, like all the things that you get to do. I am most jealous of your relationship with Eric Church. Like that is number one for me, like far and away. How did that start, and how can I also become boys with him?
This story is the rarest of the rare because of how we met and then how it unfolded from there. So I guess I'll just tell the whole thing. So, all right, my father passed away in 2008. My mother passed away in 98. During that 10-year interim, my father was physically functional. He was emotionally struggling really badly. He had given up for the most part. And so our relationship during the last couple of years of his life was such that I desperately wanted time with him, but the time had to be on his terms when he was in a great place emotionally, if that makes sense. So when he did pass, I was lost. I'll tell you, Connor, I don't care what your relationship is with your father if you are a male, whether he's your best friend, whether y'all butt heads, whether you fight, whatever that relationship is, your father is a compass. And if you need an answer to a problem, he's got it. Roof's leaking, call Dad. Truck won't start, call Dad. Having a fight with a buddy, call Dad. Need money, call Dad. Well, that compass is wayward when your father dies. And mine was all over the place. I was rudderless, just trying to figure it out, barely 31 years old at that time. And so my childhood home, because he had given up, was in terrible shape. My old man, from the time that I can remember him, lit one Marlboro light off the next. And that's what, I mean, from the second he got up till right before he went to bed, he was cranking heaters. And so late in his life, he spent a lot of time smoking, a lot of time drinking Crown Royal, and he wasn't in the best place. And our house was really in bad shape. So when he passed, I kind of made it a mission that I wanted to keep the property and that we were going to fix it up. And so our son, who is now a high school senior, was a little tyke at the time. He was 2.5 years old. And so we didn't want to bring him up there and subject him to what the house shape was. And so I'd go up there by myself sometimes. Lainey, my wife, would go up by herself sometimes to help clean. But when I was up there by myself, man, I was so sad. I was just overwhelmed with grief so bad that I would drink Jack Daniels out of the bottle, and I would turn Sinners Like Me up as loud as it would go, and I would sing it as loud as I could sing it. And it was a perfect vehicle to carry those emotions in that moment for me. Well, at the end of that year, I had a buddy who got us some tickets to see Eric play at a little old honky-tonk up here in Greensboro, North Carolina, called Arizona Pete's. And at that time, Eric was trying his ass off to make it, and every meet and greet was on his bus. And so I was in that meet and greet line. Every ticket was a meet and greet. So as I'm in that line, I'm like, do I tell this guy what his work means to me, or do I hedge for fear? He's going to think I'm a weirdo. So I'm like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Well, then the further up in the line I got, the more jack I had. I was like, screw it. I'm never going to see this guy again. Screw it. I'm going to tell him. So I get up there on the bus and I stick my hand out. I don't have the guts to look him in the eye. And I said, hey, man, it's going to be weird. I lost my daddy this year, and I desperately needed a tow rope. I needed something to pull me along. And that record was the perfect vehicle to carry that for me and pull me. And I know that you're going to be the biggest star in the format one day. But every single night while you're playing these little old honky-tonk sewers, there's at least one person in that crowd who desperately needs what you have to say. And tonight it's me. And I was mortified. It came out of my mouth. I was about to run off the bus. And he was like, hold on, come here. Come back here. Tell me some more. So we fellowshipped a little more and went in. The show was great. About 6 months later, my phone rang. He'd been fired from the Rascal Flats, me and my gang tour. And his label was trying to do some goodwill, get him to do some goodwill and fish in this fishing tournament called the Porter Wagner Memorial Fishing Tournament. And it was to raise money for artists and musicians who didn't have benefits in case they needed some money in a crisis. Eric said, no, won't do it. No chance, not doing it. Finally, according to the public relations individual who called me, he slammed his fist on the table and said, you get that Marty Smith guy from ESPN and fly his ass to Nashville, spend a day on the water with me, I'll do it. Otherwise, blankety blank, blank, blank. And I'm like, is this a prank call? I mean, Connor, I'm standing outside the 29 hauler waiting to interview Kevin Harvick, and I'm on the phone listening to this lady tell me this. I'm like, you don't understand. Like, I love Eric Church. She goes, we know. We'll pay you to come. Please come. I'm like, you ain't got to pay me. I'll be there. So I called my wife. I'm like, babe, I ain't coming home tomorrow. I'm going to go to Nashville, and apparently I'm going to fish with Eric Church. So I fly to Nashville. Eric, per usual, shows up about 45 minutes late, and all the boats are gone. We're just sitting there in the marina waiting on him. He has a cooler full of beer, and me and him got drunk, raised hell, became fast friends, won the fishing tournament, and we have been thick as thieves ever since, man. Isn't that weird?
Oh, my God. That's incredible. I knew there was a bond, obviously, like over his music and stuff, but I think a lot of people wonder about that. And I've talked about this on the podcast before of like what it's like when you meet a celebrity or something like that. And I've had that very same thought of if I ever got to meet Chris Stapleton, I would tell him, your music got me through the death of my dad. And he probably hears that all the time.
Tell me that story.
So my dad died when I was 27. And 3 bouts of cancer in about a year. As I was in a different place in my life, but had a great support system and everything that went around it. But in the days that he was dying, he had terminal cancer. My mom had Broken Halos as the intro song for his montage. I heard Broken Halos probably 20 times a day for like a 3-week stretch. And that moment was like right after that, I was like, all right, this is going to help me get through seeing these photos that I'm going to have to look at of my dad and think back on these memories of his life. And also, like I had already become a Chris Stapleton fan. I actually saw Chris Stapleton open for Eric Church 2015 in Nebraska, ironically enough. And that was like right before he was hitting it big, and it was incredible. And I turned to him so many times during my grief. And I thought to myself, I'm going to turn on some Stapleton. I'm going to belt my heart out like to whatever comes on. And I'm just going to roll with it. And it got me through those moments. And I've seen him in 3 different states. I would, pay whatever it is to be able to see him. I think he's awesome. I think he's as good as there is. And if I ever was in one of those meet and greet type situations with Chris Stapleton, I would tell you, just thank you. What you have done in music is something that has brought such joy, such peace to my family, and has gotten me through so many tough times in my life. And it's meant everything. It's like right when you said that, I'm like, oh my God, I've experienced like the exact same sort of thing. Have not become best friends with Chris Stapleton yet in the way that you have developed this relationship.
Stay diligent, Connor. But you never know what might happen, bro. I'll tell you though, man, that's the power of the song. I say all the time, brother, that there are certain professions that save lives every day. There are doctors, there are EMTs, there are ER nurses, there are these individuals who have devoted their lives to saving the lives of others. And I always put songwriters in that list, because the ability that those people have to tell a story in 3 minutes that can offer hope to somebody who needs hope so desperately and feels they have nowhere else to turn is a talent that is beyond measure. And I admire songwriters just about more than anybody else, because my goodness, I would love to have that skill and that ability. And Eric just happens to be the best one on the planet. Amen. Yes, I'm biased, but
no
Stapleton
argument there.
Ain't bad either, Jack.
He's not. All right, I want to get you out of here with some rapid fire. Just 5 questions. First thing that comes to mind. Does that work for you?
Absolutely.
All right, I asked Laura Rutledge this last week. What is the thing in your career that you haven't done yet that you'd like to do?
Monaco Grand Prix Formula One race.
Ooh, that's good. That's right. That's very much within the ESPN wheelhouse too, I would think.
I think it might be able to happen. My blessings are very rich, brother. I get the blessing of covering the Masters every year, not only for ESPN, but for the club itself. And that to me is the holy grail. I mean, I don't know if you're a golf guy, but oh my word, it's Disney World, and it's a spiritual experience, man. You are walking with the ghosts at Augusta, and I'm so grateful for that. But I want to go to Monaco.
That's a good one. Who is the person for your book that was maybe toughest to track down, or you weren't able to make it work to be able to get them for it?
Well, you know who I went after very diligently. This person really wanted to do it, but our schedules never synced, and so that person unfortunately did not make the pages. Deion Sanders. Oh. And I asked Deion Sanders, listen, man, when I really got to know him, he was at Jackson State. And he and I, going back to fishing, he and I were in the same fishing tournament together with Academy Sports and Outdoors. And I had the opportunity to sit with him and have a conversation just like you and I are having about life, love, loss, victories, losses, triumphs. And I learned so much from him about self-confidence and the fact that self-confidence and humility walk hand in hand. You can look at Dion, and if you are not self-confident, you might go, oh, he's cocky or all these things. I don't personally view it that way at all. I don't view it that way even a little bit, because everything has someone else's best interests in mind. And so I wanted him in that book so bad, dude. Like I may not sleep tonight now that I've actually put that out into the world.
He's going to write his own book on leadership. That's
really
Saban. Why I turned you down. Yeah.
So is Dawn Staley, who I also asked, but she declined me because I believe she's probably going to do her own world-class leadership book. So, yeah, I went after them all, boss.
Okay, true or false? Sideline CEO was actually named after my daughter, Claire Elizabeth O'Gara, initial CEO, who will one day probably be a starting long snapper in the SEC. I've already put a word in with Beamer.
How did you know? You have tremendous clairvoyance. Claire, I hope you enjoy the book named after you, my friend.
Okay, outside of Neon Moon, give me your GOAT country song.
Yeah, Neon Moon is way up there. I would have to say it's probably The Highwayman. I mean, that one is so good when you put those four individuals together in a song like that. Each of them get a verse. Each one of those verses demands of you that you think, because if you listen to what they're saying in that song, like think about Cash's. Think about what Johnny Cash says at the end of that song. Or I may be a single drop of rain, but I will remain. I'll be back again and again and again and again. It's just remarkable. A lot of people will tell you He Stopped Loving Her Today is the greatest country music song of all time. A lot of people will say, I think that's probably an individual question for each person. We tried to have a debate the other day over cold beers about the Mount Rushmore of country music. It's a difficult one. But I'm going to go with The Highwayman because all four of those dudes are icons. Waylon, Willie, Cash, and Chris are icons.
It's almost like you got to break it up into eras like you would do for the GOAT NBA player. You know, it's like it's so tough to compare when the game was so different 50 years ago.
It's MJ, by the way.
It is MJ. And look, you see all the Chicago stuff around me. Suburbs of Chicago, born in 1990. Okay. Like, yeah, you're getting no argument from me on that one at all. All right, last one for you. If ESPN told you that they wanted to pay you $10 million a year, but they would only honor your contract if you spoke without your Southern accent, would you do it?
Yeah, I'd figure it out. 10 mil's a lot of paper, dude. I'd be using some of that 10 mil to go to one of them classes to get rid of it.
Be yourself no matter what, unless somebody's signing a check for $10 million.
That's right, man. Yeah, it would be hard. I mean, it would be super duper weird. I tried to do 2 weekends ago, McGee and I had these young ladies on our show who were from Australia, and they play community college basketball. And they went to an Alabama game. You might have seen them. You might have TikTok. I don't have all that crap. I'm old. But it became a thing. And so after our show, McGee and I were riding to the airport in Birmingham. And I start doing, I try to do my Australian accent. He was like, don't ever, ever, ever do that again. Don't do that. So it might take a lot of school.
Oh God. Yeah, that would be incredible. Could you imagine if you just did this in silence and then busted it out for a full-on report? Like you just, like with SEC Nation or Marty McGee, something like that, and you just go into it without saying a word. You talk about going viral. That would go more viral than Leave the Sides.
I mean, I'm telling you, it's just weird how many people think I'm making it up. And that includes some writers. There have been one writer specifically. came after me pretty good and was extremely critical of the fact that he believes it's a show,
What?
a prominent one, and
A
it just cracks me up. I'm like, man. And then if you heard my buddies I grew up with, you would understand that it is as country as it gets and as southern as it gets in the southwestern part of Virginia and East Tennessee and East Kentucky, and that whole Appalachian corridor is very much country. And all of us got this accent.
That'd be incredible if you were doing it for this long. That would actually be more impressive if this was fake and you didn't have any sort of slip ups or anything like that.
That would that smart. There's no chance I could do that.
All right, I'm gonna have to ask you off air who exactly is doing that, because that makes no sense to me whatsoever.
I will answer it later.
I really appreciate the time, man. Sideline CEO, September 26th. Everybody go pick up a copy. It's awesome. Really good stuff. We'll do this again soon, man.
I'm so grateful that you took the time, brother. Thank you. And thank you for reading it. And I love what you guys do on all of your platforms. It is as damn SEC as it gets. And all of us who are fans of college football love it. Y'all do a great job, dude.
Appreciate that, man.